Welcome to Superstitions, Traditions, and Definitions. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Trish.
She's still here.
I came back.
You did.
She's still my niece.
I am. And I think we can change that.
No, I wouldn't change it for any amount of money.
Either.
No.
So that's good. That's good. I'm glad it can't be changed. All right. So we are going to do Am I the Asshole?
Okay, I'm ready.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Am I the asshole for suing my mother for authorizing a medical procedure 2 months before I was of legal age?
What kind of medical procedure?
Supposedly an appendectomy.
Oh.
There's more to the story, though, so you want to hear it all first?
I think I do, because that sounds, yes.
It sounds good in theory.
In theory, yes.
My mother and I had a rocky relationship. She was not the affectionate type.
Okay.
My father, who was the affectionate parent, passed when I was 7 years old. I always felt as if my mother didn't love me, didn't want me around. She referred to me as the ugly duckling and called me an imbecile.
Well, that is horrible.
It was. I wasn't allowed friends and was rarely allowed to leave our apartment. When I was tired, bothered by the hunch in my shoulders and the cross of my eyes that always tattled the exhaustion I was feeling, she would strike me. But my father, he loved me, all my quirks, and planned my care for my entire life, despite his death. He was wealthy, incredibly wealthy, not only by his own inventions, but prior to his hard work, he had already inherited a fortune from his grandfather.
Okay.
He came from money and meant to ensure I was to receive the benefits of our lineage's determination. In his will, my mother was to receive 1/3 of his $4 million estate.
Oh, my goodness.
The remaining 2/3 were left for me.
Okay.
He planned for my future children in his will as well, but had a stipulation included that bequeathed my inheritance to my mother if I were to die without having a child.
Oh, okay.
So, in 1935, just before my 21st birthday, I was at lunch with my mother. We were discussing the future, my eagerness to get out of the house, meet the eligible bachelors, date, marry, start my family, and my life. She didn't see the appeal, having been married, widowed, married again, and divorced several times.
Mom. Several times before or
no, after her dad died, she had, I think, 4 different stepdads.
Oh my goodness, okay.
But before she could finish her tirade of how ridiculous my dreams were, I started experiencing sharp pains in my abdomen. So severe, my mother actually rushed me to the hospital. As soon as I walked in, it seemed my doctor knew exactly what was going on. Seeing my visible pain in the area of my stomach I was holding, he didn't even need to do a full exam. He knew right away it was my appendix and it needed to come out. He sent me home with the surgery scheduled for later that week.
Okay.
It seemed strange at the time he didn't assess my stomach at all, but did have a nurse assess my knowledge of current events and history.
Oh, okay. I can maybe see where this is going. Okay.
But I couldn't focus on that with the immense pain I was in. It wasn't until I woke up in the hospital after the appendectomy that I realized something was amiss. In my weeks convalescing at the hospital, I overheard hospital staff referring to me as the idiot patient, and overheard my nurse state to the doctor that I didn't suspect a thing. I was in too much pain to give this much thought at the time. But I kept a hold of those conversations in the back of my mind, knowing they meant something. Upon returning home, my mother locked me in my room. She sent me no help and very little food. So they're wealthy. They have servants and everything.
They could have somebody that came in, took care of her, fed her, did all of that stuff.
None of that. It wasn't long before I learned what actually happened. My mother bribed 2 doctors to remove my fallopian tubes, sterilizing me. $9,000 each was what they charged her to ruin my life. To her, $18,000 was chump change. She planned it well, had been discussing this little farce for months prior to the act. She hated me, she wanted my money, and would stop at nothing to get it. Destroying me was a bonus. I sued my mother and the 2 doctors. The San Francisco district attorney picked up my case quickly and charged all 3 with mayhem, a charge reserved for cases involving disabling or disfiguring a person.
Okay.
The trial was horrendous. The things my mother said about me: excessive masturbating since the age of 3, I displayed erotic tendencies, and that I was unfit for society.
Oh my goodness.
It was exhausting. I wanted it over, so I agreed to the DA dropping the criminal charges, and instead of the $500,000 I was asking for, I settled for $150,000.
Okay.
My mother died a few years after the trial from a stroke. I didn't mourn her. I suffered the rest of my life from my mother's selfishness. My love life was a joke. 5 marriages, not a single one made it to a 7th anniversary. Most didn't see a 3rd anniversary before the divorce papers were filed. I had no children of my own, and I had to spend the rest of my life proving to the world I was not a moron. I was lucky to find Donald to share my last 6 years of life with, but I would have loved a child and wished I had one to carry my memory on.
Okay, so I have so many questions. Okay, so she had, what caused the pain in her abdomen that caused her to first go to the hospital? Did her mother give her something?
It had to have been. I haven't read her biography, but there's a book out now on, her name is Cooper Hewitt.
Cooper Hewitt, okay.
She was an heiress, obviously.
Obviously,
It was planned for months, I think almost a year before her 21st birthday. The mom and doctors had talked and the bride was in place. So it had to have been
that they were giving her something that would cause that pain so that she could go in. And they didn't do any type of exam. They knew automatically what to do.
It was going to be an appendectomy. And they did the appendectomy.
I was going to say, did they go ahead and do the appendectomy?
I mean, she lost her appendix with her fallopian tubes.
Okay. I have to say she's an asshole. I mean, I can't find any way around that.
The mother is.
Yes, the mother is an asshole, not the daughter.
Not the daughter.
I
mean, good for her for suing.
I know it. I cannot believe that. I had never heard of that type of suit being called that. And I love that the judge actually, it's sad that she couldn't carry it out in the torment that her mother put her through that changed her life. And I can't imagine that her mother would not have been happy with 1/3 of $4 million back in 1930s. I mean, that's
it. I don't know what that would inflated. That was the actual amount. It was $4 million in the 30s.
I can't imagine that would not be enough to carry her on. Plus, if she would just have been friends with her daughter and tried to make it a positive relationship, they could have kept all of that together
and had a good time together.
I know. So
this was during the eugenics movement.
Okay. So tell me a little more about the eugenics movement and how that all...
It started in England. A guy named... In the U.S., it was like the early 1900s to about the 1940s. At the end of World War II is when we were like, oh, that's not nice. So it started with Francis Galton.
Okay.
In the late 1800s. He was an Englishman, an intellectual. Did lots of studies, did lots of works in psychology, meteorology, genetics, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So he was a half cousin of Charles Darwin.
Oh, really?
I mean, I don't know that has any play. It was interesting information.
I find that very interesting. Yes.
And he's the one who actually coined the phrase eugenics. It was either Greek or Latin anyway. It means good birth. Okay. And that's what he wanted. He wanted good births of white, strong, intelligent people.
Oh, yes. So anyone that did not fall into those parameters or fit in those parameters, then
it was not a good birth, I guess.
So if it was not a good birth, what happened? If you were,
as far as him, that's all I know. I didn't get into his side. His view, his word, his little ideology was adopted here. It was adopted here right at the turn of the century. So early 1900s. I think it officially began in 1904. But we did all sorts of silly things with it. Their state fairs would have fit family competitions where they would herd in best baby competitions. And it wasn't like a pageant. It was like livestock. They measure, they weigh.
So if you were kind of like Darwin's survival of the fittest, I can see all of that coming in together.
It was like we do now in state fairs with livestock, but it was with your baby and your families and your children. And
I wonder what you won if your baby.
I guess a title. I mean, I don't think they like.
And what happens if your baby doesn't meet that criteria? At
some point, people were like, "Huh, what are we going to do with this?"
Yes.
So forced sterilizations became legal for one.
Yes.
And you could, any mom, dad, grandparent, whatever, could have you tested. And if you didn't meet a certain IQ or didn't meet a certain social norm, you could be sterilized without your consent.
Which is why they were, instead of doing an exam, they were asking her various questions about what was going on, who the president, days of the week, things that maybe they could then say that she messed up on.
Yes.
And then they did this procedure in order to make sure that she did not reproduce.
Yes, because she was considered, based on that exam, an imbecile, which was that term, that era for developmental disabilities. So that's also with the height of institutions or asylums for people with developmental disabilities. And sanatoriums are at this time. This is the start of like women's suffrage, where your husband can still drop you off because you read too many novels, or you argue with him and the house isn't clean. Right.
You dare to express an opinion, or okay.
So
had an unfit. You weren't fit for
breeding.
Yes. My goodness.
In the eugenics movement in the U.S., we were praised by Hitler, specifically the state of California, which is where this was.
Oh, really?
Specifically the state of California.
Wouldn't you have to question anything that you did that Hitler praised?
Well, but you also have to keep in mind that at this time, the war hadn't started yet. So this is pre-war.
Okay, so we didn't know the
extent of
what that phrase meant.
Yeah,
okay.
Of his eugenics movement.
Gotcha.
It's actually what he did with it, and the Holocaust and the Jews and that we were like, that's a bad idea.
That is bad.
Yeah. But yeah, he praised us for ours, based a lot of his start to his on our eugenics movement in the U.S. And it was because of him that we realized that we were kind of the assholes.
Maybe we are definitely the assholes.
We are the assholes.
Yes, she is definitely not the daughter. God bless the daughter, but the mother was definitely. I cannot imagine being that concerned about money. At $1 million back then wouldn't be enough, so I'm going to take my daughter down, and first of all, I'm going to do something to her so she has that pain for a long time, and then take her down to have her sterilized, so I can end up with the rest of her money. I'm surprised that next phase didn't get carried out, which would have been the daughter's death.
Right.
And then she would.
And I'm sure at some point it would have, had she not
taken it to court,
and had she not figured out what happened to her. I mean, they had no intentions whatsoever of her finding out she had been sterilized.
So it was an accidental. She overheard
things.
The nurses talking, and
that's how she discovered that.
So,
our Supreme Court,
yes,
was a fierce advocate for involuntary sterilization.
Really?
There was actually a law passed by the Supreme Court. It was Buck versus Bell.
Buck versus Bell. Okay.
A woman named Carrie Buck. This was in 1927, just before, about 8 years before Anne. She was a single woman who got pregnant.
Oh, no.
In 1927.
Oh, no. Okay.
And because she was because she was out of wedlock having a baby, her promiscuity was proof
that she was
not quite right and not a candidate. Yeah, and not fit for society. There is speculation, and it was alleged in court that the baby was a product of rape.
Okay.
But we weren't concerned with that.
No.
I mean, she shouldn't have got pregnant.
Whatever. We could get into all kind of issues on here, but we'll just smile and go, yeah, okay.
Supreme Court Justice Wendell Holmes
said
about this particular ruling about Carrie Buck, it is better for all of the world if, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for a crime, or to let them starve for imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. He was talking about the parents, Carrie Buck, and her baby.
Whoa. Okay, so had she already had the baby?
She had already had the baby at this point, had gone to court in Virginia, all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Because they were going to try to sterilize her.
Yes.
And probably the baby, too.
And it sounds like it, because apparently, according to Justice Wendell Holmes, there was 3 generations of imbeciles, and that was plenty, in his opinion. So it legitimized the various sterilization laws that were popping up all over the country. California's program was so robust that the Nazis turned to it for advice.
That is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I can make a whole list of assholes right here. My goodness. So what was she sterilized?
Yes. Yes. Carrie Buck was sterilized because the Supreme Court said it was not only a good idea, that it is the best possible outcome for all of society.
Wow.
Yeah. Estimated about 65,000 women were sterilized.
Against their will.
Against their will. Forcibly sterilized.
That is crazy.
In the U.S. at this time. California was one of the first. I think Indiana was the first to enact a sterilization law.
I find it kind of ironic that California was...
I mean, we learn from our mistakes, I think.
Yeah, the first... My goodness, that's...
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
So when did this get overturned? How long did this period of our history last?
Till about the 40s. At the end, when we started questioning...
After Hitler?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean...
After World War I.
Well, and also at this time, Martin Cooney... we've done an Am I the Asshole episode on him. This is when he had Babyland at Coney Island.
Yes.
And he's trying to show doctors, because of the eugenics movement, they weren't worried about premature babies. They would send them home and, say a prayer.
Yeah, if you make it, you make it.
Yeah. So he has this incubator and he's saying, this will save this baby's life.
Yes.
And they were like, And it turned into a sideshow where he saved, I think, 800.
Really?
800 babies, including his own daughter. She was 6 weeks premature. And
is that when the whole idea?
So that is at this time during the start of the World War I.
Okay.
And then we're seeing the Nazis and the Holocaust, and we're like, that's horrible.
That's horrible what we're doing.
And then we're seeing infants that typically were sent home to die, survive, and thrive. And his daughter ended up being one of his nurses and ran the Coney Island, I can't remember what he called it, Baby Emporium or something, but they were like, okay, so it was,
so you have,
there were still forced sterilizations as late as the 80s.
Really? Mm-hmm. I did not know that.
But the bulk of the eugenics movement ended.
So as it continued to the 80s, was it still that your parents or husband or someone would have to take you?
Not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, kind of. It was primarily for people with developmental disabilities
that were in institutions.
There was and I'll have to look into it, and I'll post something in the comments. But there was a hospital or something in the South, the Deep South, that Black women would come in for something routine, like a cold or a cough, and they would end up having surgery, and there was like 20,000.
Oh, yes.
Sterilized during that episode, and that was in the
60s. I think that was in the 60s. Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily people saying, it was more the doctors
that were just
doing
making that decision for society. Well, I'm going to vote that the mother is an asshole.
The mother is an asshole.
There were lots of other assholes. The doctors were assholes.
Yes.
Doctors here were assholes, the ones that took the bribe to go ahead and do the sterilization. I can't, those are dark times back in the Supreme Court. I mean, things were different then. I mean, you learn from that. That is why you should study history and why these things are so important, so that you can learn from those things. Because it was a totally different time then. Now we look at that and we go, oh.
We had an organization whose sole purpose was to track eugenics for us. It was called the ERO.
Oh, and what did they keep track of?
They considered bipolar disorder, epilepsy, learning disabilities, feeble-mindedness was the term for like a catch-all for any kind of mental illness, mental disability, developmental disability, specific traits of criminality. Like, you've got a sloped forehead.
Oh, you didn't.
That's what criminals have. You look like a common criminal.
You didn't have symmetry because, they say symmetry then.
Alcoholism.
Oh, wow.
Was one. Mm-hmm. And those were they were targeted for elimination from the human existence. Alcoholism. If you want to eliminate alcoholism from the human existence, the easiest way to do that?
Eliminate alcohol?
You would think, but no. People who drink it, they gotta go.
Yes.
The alcohol can stay.
We'll keep it.
The alcohol is fine. It's those people that drink it. I mean, if I'm okay with being sterilized now. If you would like to take me up and have me sterilized, I'm good.
I think mine kind of happened naturally at this age.
Whatever.
I didn't have to worry about that.
You don't really have to take me. In a few years, mine will take care of itself too.
But women's rights have just come so far. We can only hope that we continue to.
They took there was no consideration given to environmental factors, like poverty or rural areas that had the one-room schoolhouse that everybody was learning in together, kindergarten through high school, and you made it to maybe 6th grade if you were lucky because you had to help mom and dad on the farm.
Yes, yeah.
Well, you have your 6th grade education.
You're considered.
And now you're an imbecile.
You're
the ERO, Eugenics Resource Office Organization. I don't remember what the O is, but one of the things, everything was so ambiguous, criminality.
Yes, that's just...
And feeble-mindedness. There was no clear-cut definition, and they weren't trained. The people collecting the data, making the decisions, weren't trained psychologists or trained doctors. They were, look for these markers, and if you see them, put a check.
That means that they...
So it was entire families would be marked as feeble-minded, and
because they didn't have an education.
Right. They were working farms, and
from a scientific standpoint, you can manipulate data to represent anything you want data to represent if you manipulate it correctly.
That's exactly how it was done. There was nothing scientific about the research. It was all just vague.
Let's eliminate the poor, the uneducated, those that don't fit into that specific mold.
And they kept track of these whole entire families.
That's scary. And they're an asshole. And so now we have it. We know who the assholes are, and we know who the asshole wasn't. Yes, the daughter was not the asshole.
Anne was not the asshole. Anne Cooper Hewitt.
Again, proud of Anne for, at that time, as a female, standing up for herself and taking that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's
oh, yeah.
And her mother. My goodness.
Yeah. Mom ended up passing away from a stroke just a few years after. Anne didn't live. She died in the 50s. So.
Well, that has to just change your whole psyche there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 5 failed marriages. Actually, the 5th marriage, he outlived her. They didn't divorce. They were together. But it only lasted, I don't even think they had a 7th anniversary.
That's sad.
And she never got to have
children.
And
no.
All for
money.
Yeah.
Maybe some control and power over her daughter, too. Maybe a little revenge there. Money, power, control.
Yeah, and from what it sounds, I want to read the book, the autobiography, whatever it was. But it sounds like, just from the research I did, that she wasn't... Dad wanted her and Dad loved her, but Mom never really did.
So she always had some resentment there. Probably was resentful that Dad left 2/3 to her and only 1/3 to...
And the other men she married were fairly wealthy, too. So...
She had more than her fair share.
She had plenty.
Yes.
She would have been fine. And, I mean, 21. Almost 21. You could have just sent her on her merry way.
Yes.
Which it sounds like she did anyway. But
goodness.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay. Well, come back on Tuesdays for superstitions and Saturdays for Am I the Asshole?
And thank you for letting me share this experience.
Heartbreaking tale.
No. Horribly sad.
However, the good thing is we learned from it.
Yes, we did. We did learn from it.
It took Nazis to convince us it was bad, but there was learning and Supreme Court decisions backing it, and then thank God for eventual learning, I guess.
Yes, thank goodness we continue to evolve as a society.
That's right. All right. Well,
do we wave and say goodbye?
Okay, wave and say goodbye. We're crooked, but it's all right.
Are we crooked?
Yeah, it's okay. We were hastily set up. So enjoy the sideways. Just tilt your head a little bit. You'll be fine.
I'll go back this way.
Okay. All right.